Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Hey, what's up, Dave? This is Taylor. Once again, I was critical when Deshaun Watson was playing bad. I was patient when he was playing bad, but I also called him out for his bad play. But now I'm going to defend Deshaun Watson because this season, outside of the Dallas game, he has gotten better every single game. I don't know who takes responsibility for this loss. It's definitely not on Watson. It was a team loss, but the defense doesn't look as good as it did last year. It's absolutely a shell of itself, and we all know that the offensive line seemed to have aged overnight. So let me know what you think. Thanks for taking my call. You do a great job, Dave.
As always, appreciate all of the voicemails. Let's welcome in Spencer German from 92.3 The Fan, as well as the Cleveland Browns on SI. Spencer, they're doing things that bad football teams do. Penalties, inopportune times. Defense has given up a boatload of rushing yards that they shouldn't. We talk about complementary football. You couldn't have a team playing worse complementary football than the Browns. I know you wrote an article. Watson really isn't to blame. I tend to agree with you.
Yeah, listen, I think the caller was onto something there in terms of Deshaun taking strides each week. I think I don't know that they're like obvious strides. Like it's not like a linear thing where week to week he looks, better than the last week necessarily. There's maybe some steps back along the way, and there's been some problems in each game that I think you can point to and say, okay, there's something there. But in terms of this game on Sunday against the Raiders, like he's at the bottom of the list in terms of things or people or players, whatever you want to say, that I'm placing blame on. You bring up the defense. I think at this point we have enough of a sample size to know this isn't the same defense from last year. They're having trouble stopping the run. I mean, the Raiders came into that game with the least amount of rushing yards in the NFL. They had 153 rushing yards in the NFL, which was dead last in the league, and they doubled that total against the Browns. I mean, that's ridiculous. And then on top of that, you throw in the offensive line play still being a problem. Drop passes being a problem, which that's the one blemish on Deshaun's day yesterday was the interception, and that clearly wasn't on him. It was Amari Cooper's fault. Like there's still some moments where you can look and say, is he seeing the field well? Is he making the right plays? But I don't think that was the problem yesterday. So I understand where he's the easy, low hanging fruit thing to point at, and I do understand on some level the quarterback's always going to take blame because it's the quarterback, and that's how this sport works. That's just what we do. And he did say that after the game, he's the quarterback and it's on him to get the offense right. So yeah, he'll take some of that. But in terms of like this loss, and if you want to find something to blame, I'm pointing very minimally at Deshaun after this one. I would argue I think that Tennessee Titans game last year, and I think this game yesterday against the Raiders were probably his two most complete games. And as I say complete because, like, yeah, the Ravens game is a game people reference from last year, but that was the second half. He was great. First half was iffy. The from start to finish, this was one of his top two best games that he's played as a member of the Cleveland Browns.
The only thing, and I said this with Lance earlier, the one thing that disappoints me with Watson, last 2 weeks, ball has been in his hands in the fourth quarter with a chance to win the game, and he hasn't gotten it done for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
To me, that's what you want in the quarterback. Here's the ball in the fourth quarter. Go win us the game. Find a way to win us a game. Had the opportunity twice, and he didn't do it.
It's interesting you say that because I do think this speaks to, what is a franchise quarterback in 2024? I think we like to point at these certain statistical figures for that and say, well, he's got to hit 300 yards, and he's got to hit in a game, and he's got to get like 2 or 3 touchdowns, and by the end of the season, he's got to have like 4,500 yards and 30 touchdowns, and that's how we know he's elite. I honestly think, like, given some of the trends we're seeing in offenses, being down and passing attacks being down and stats being down in those categories, I think like an elite quarterback is what you just alluded to, Dave. Like I think it's a guy who in crunch time and those moments can lead you to victory. Now, I guess the only thing I'd say, and I do agree, like multiple weeks in a row where you have a chance to do that and he's not delivering. In this instance, yes, it's still on him to finish that job. Yes, but you can argue that he was put behind the 8 ball a little bit because the Dustin Hopkins PAT missed PAT is the reason that they had to go for a touchdown anyway. Like in theory, he got them into field goal range where they could have tied that game. And on a drive like that, that's technically all you're really asking for if you make that PAT. So there's context to that as well that you can point to. But yeah, I think that is kind of the mark of what we need to be focusing on when it comes to Deshaun. It's not as so much about the stats for me anymore because I just don't think he's going to be that guy from Houston in that way. But is he delivering in crunch time? Is he leading you to game winning drives and lifting this team up in those moments? That's I think what's going to be the mark of whether or not Deshaun sinks or swims here the rest of the way of the contract that he has here as a member of the Cleveland Browns.
So here's an interesting thing as well. Watson recorded an 88.5 passing grade yesterday versus the Raiders, second highest mark for the week so far. 2 games tonight on Monday night, behind just Lamar Jackson. Highest individual game grade since week 17 of 2020. And again, be that as it may, you can those grades. I know there are there's a lot of subjectivity. He played pretty well. You mentioned the interception really wasn't his fault. There were a couple times where the ball sailed on him, or by and large, he wasn't the problem.
Yeah, and people like to point to the 2020 numbers in Houston. There's one for you. He had his highest rating since 2020, week 17, when he was playing for the Texans. So I guess he channeled that 2020 Deshaun a little bit there. You also can't forget not the interception, the touchdown that got wiped out, obviously on the holding call from Nick Harris. Like that's another play where people love saying one of the first things I saw after the game was, well, Deshaun didn't get the 200 yards again. Okay, but that play stands, and I understand. Like I've seen sort of some different arguing, varying opinions on the holding call. There's people who are like, it was clearly a hold. He had his jersey, and which is true. But there's also people who are like, yeah, but it was kind of ticky tack in terms of like how quickly he had to get rid of, like, to drop his hand when he was kind of moving across his body. And so I don't know. It's maybe a ticky tack call, especially when we see Myles Garrett with guys wrapped around his neck and he doesn't get a holding call. So you could have let that one go, but leaving that where it is, I think if Deshaun completes that pass and that play stands, you're talking about a guy who had 250 yards passing and 2 touchdowns, and if the interception doesn't happen, no interceptions. So yeah, like I said, I was impressed by his game yesterday, and he was hardly the reason that they lost that game to Las Vegas.
Yeah, I'm with you. And you know what? As I said earlier, those are things that happen to football teams that aren't playing well. When you're playing poorly, everything seems like it's stacked against you. So,
Yeah.
and right now, Browns aren't playing well.